Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Through Your Eyes. My name is Emily, as some of you may already know, and today we have a special guest named Elizabeth Schmidt, and of course, my co host Josh. I'm going to pass it over to Elizabeth just to introduce herself a little bit before we get into our topic today, which I'm very excited about AI and its ethical implications and academic integrity. Alrighty, Elizabeth, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I work with Mrs. Shasta Hamilton, and I go to her dance studio, Stage Door Dance, which she founded herself. And I'm here right now, so yeah, I'm very excited to be on the show too.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Josh. I'm another co-host of the podcast. I'm 16 right now, and yeah, let's get straight into the topic today. I'm super excited to talk about it. Actually, because it also just came up like earlier today during school, so I thought that was like a crazy little coincidence. So we wanted to talk about how AI is affecting academic integrity because you see it a ton now. I have tons of friends who use AI to get all their schoolwork done. They just use ChatGPT to write their essays. And really, is it ethical or not? And I think the first question I want to ask to you guys, like Elizabeth and Emily, is do you think that students should be allowed to use AI to like assist them or do their work? And if not, what kind of limitations should we like put on it?
I think it's really subjective. Me personally, I think it really depends on the context. And this is something that I actually debated in my ethics class last semester about whether it's ethical or not, whether we can use ChatGPT. And my professor at the time, she actually has two college-aged kids. Her daughter's my age, she's 19, and then her son is like 20 or 21, something like that. And, she was saying that, like, she hears her kids complain about how their friends use literally ChatGPT to write their entire essays, their midterm papers, their final papers, and how sometimes they get caught, sometimes they don't. But when you're in college, it's definitely a different playing field for sure, I'd say, just 'cause the, the punishment is a lot stronger, I'd say, than it is in high school or below, just because if you get caught cheating in college, then you get the boot, so but me personally, I'd say it depends on the assignment. I know some professors in their syllabus, they say it's okay as long as you use it as a framework instead of copying it verbatim from ChatGPT's output. But that's just my 2 cents. I think it's okay as a framework depending on the assignment. It also depends on how the professor feels in regards to it. But what do you guys think?
So what I think about it is I agree with it being subjective, but also a limitation on it would help, but you also can't trust that everyone's being honest. And that's I mean, it's a big problem in our world now. Um, Personally being in middle school, it's definitely I mean the consequences are definitely smaller because you wouldn't immediately get booted or you wouldn't be expelled or whatever. It's more like trusting, especially middle schoolers, to be honest, is really hard. So I think in certain areas, like obviously the framework or a basis for it, like um, helping with intros and topics, that sort of helps. But having it write your entire essay completely loses all like human integrity to it. And I think that pulls in with art too, because you can't trust that people are being serious about, oh, I made this and I worked 6 hours on it, because it could have just been 5 words typed into Chat GPT or Dolly or another AI program. But completely subjective and people have their opinions.
No, like I absolutely agree, Elizabeth. And I'm so glad you brought up AI art too, because this is a whole other field. Like we can definitely get into a big conversation about this. I hear a lot of controversy surrounding AI art as well, because what's happening is I'm like coming to learn that a lot of art made by artificial intelligence takes bits and pieces from other people's real artwork. And I mean, I have like my sister would tell me about this. It integrates those small pieces, and what it ends up doing is you're like semi plagiarizing, but because the intelligence can tinker with it, affect it, it can kind of change it for creative use. But I mean, that's a whole other conversation. We can get into that. Back to your point about integrity and like, how is it affecting integrity? Because limitations are so hard to place. If we say you can use like AI to edit your work versus completely write your essay, it's such a gray area of what distinctly makes the difference. Like, is it edited if I do an entire essay and then throw it in? Is it edited if I just do the intro of ChatGPT and then do the rest? It's like this whole thing. So, and I think where I want to like really extend from there is there a world where you guys think that because it's a tool that will probably stick around, students should almost be trained to learn that they can just use AI for everything. Because why would you do it yourself if you can use AI and then educate yourself in other areas with that time? Do you guys think that's like a good idea or not?
I think I keep going back to integrity on it because you can't trust everyone to be honest, as I've said this last time. I don't think that students should be completely trained to believe that they can just get away with using Chat GPT the whole time. And if that becomes a standard in schools, that kind of like, as someone who like works close, not works, but is very close with teachers, and we've had family friends that teach younger and younger generations each year. Um, I think it takes a not a toll, but almost like the soul out of it for teachers, especially when you're writing more emotional things like you can do in college. But it really, I think it shouldn't be what trains students, and it shouldn't be the standard for students.
I mean, I
I
absolutely agree. And oh yeah, Emily, you can go ahead. You can go ahead.
gonna say I agree, and I've never really thought about it from a teacher's perspective, essentially, and how that can kind of almost, I guess, remove the emotion from their work because they're reading all these papers that are clearly written by somebody else. And even then, as a teacher, I've been told this so many times by English professors or just English teachers when I was in high school that they know and they can recognize your your cadence and your what is it, diction in writing. So they can easily tell when you've plagiarized a paper. And I can imagine how difficult that is for professors, especially at higher education, because it's like they have to take that to the dean. And especially seeing that they give students a prompt and they want their students to learn and they want them to immerse themselves in the content that they've assigned them. And then seeing that they don't and they just kind of have something else write that. I can't imagine how disheartening that can be.
Well, and I mean, even to add on to that too, I remember when my sister was applying for college, like admissions counselors would talk about how when you do your application, they know if you use ChatGPT or somebody else wrote your application for you. And if they even have like a little bit of a hint of a feeling that, oh, somebody like just made this essay with AI, they just reject the application. And well, I get that in some context because I even remember like I've been in class and kids are like presenting projects and you're almost like, there's no way they did all of that on their own. Like you can tell they used AI. The words are like crazy big for simple topics, like stuff that just obviously indicates it. So I understand where colleges are coming from there. But I think that a big issue is that if these universities are just going to instantly mark off every essay that looks like too good to be true, what happens when there is, students that are actually too good to be true that can actually write at that level or that's just generally their personality may just not emanate as much soul, they're more logical people. I think because the distinction becomes harder and harder, it begs the question like, should we just live in a world where we just let this be allowed? Like obviously in like an English class, it's like hindering their like cognitive ability, the ability to think. But I mean, what do you guys think? Is there a world where you almost think let ChatGPT write my like college essay for me or let it write my application for whatever because my job is just to do the things and be honest and then it can present the information for me.
I I think that's those are really good points. I think, and I do really like um your college application point, because if there is a student that is really like truly too good to be true, or can like really like put their heart and soul into essays and applications and such, what happened like bro, what happens there? Because they could have students where, and I hear about this a lot. Sorry everyone.
No, it's all good.
Um
It's all good. It's all good. Yeah.
and but there are, I've heard about this a lot, like certain generations not being able to read it, like very young generations not being able to read at like 6 to 10 years old, Because what happens when they have them there and they have to completely reteach them certain things that should have been learned by this point? And I would like to tie in a story from a teacher's standpoint. I'm very close friends. I did a lot with her when she was a teenager and when I was not even 10 yet. Um, and I think she would genuinely agree with each point that we're making, that it's disheartening to read something that has no emotion in it and no like human reality to it. I mean, I fe- I worry about this a lot. The fact that I wrote an essay for extra credit about the Black Plague for sixth grade year, and it was 900 words, and I thought that she was just going to take off points for it because it looked like it had been written for AI, but I had just researched enough and used enough to find each and every point that I made. I it is disheartening. I completely agree with both of your points.
No, exactly. It's really frustrating, and I think it can even feel like it's it's like almost like a why do the cheaters get to win kind of situation for a lot of people, right? It's like I know that I even worked on a project one time with a classmate of mine. We each had to write like a half of an essay, and I spent the entire, like, class period, working on it, and he was playing, like, video games the entire class period, and I remember this annoyed me so much. On the very last 2 minutes of class, they just pasted our prompt, copied, like, ChatGPT in, and students using ChatGPT for work wasn't even as commonly known as the time, so, I put in all that work, and then he got by, just, like, he quickly pasted it in, we, like, got full credit for everything, and it was all good, and I think that it does bring up the question of, is this well, on one hand, a tool for students, is it making them like lazy learners? Because a lot of people are already talking about how in education, there is now a point where it's not a grades are not meant to just be indicative of what you understand, especially like middle school and high school, right? You're not really learning like crazy important skills as much as like indicative of how much work does the student put in. But if you can still get amazing grades and do amazing with I mean, it's just a really hard situation. I don't know what I like be able to ask off of that other than I mean, how do you think we could try to like make this into like and Emily, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, even at a college level, how should people or how could the education system like establish clear cut rules about AI? Because we have nothing right now. We don't have anything saying you can use it as a tool, you can use it for this or that. It's just like all up in the air. So, what would you think on that?
I think it's kind of difficult to establish those rules, just largely because of the fact that recent advancements within AI are just so new that we can't keep up. And I forgot who it was exactly, but somebody, some like large figure, called for a pause in AI for a couple of months in AI advancement just because it's getting that advanced. And we as a society just cannot keep up, especially with the ethical implications of it. So we don't really know how to institute those rules and regulations when it comes to ChatGPT and then AI as a whole, just because we literally cannot keep up. And I think on the college level, it's really difficult to discern whether it's somebody's own work versus AI, especially with how good AI is like becoming with forming sentences. Because a few years ago, if you asked AI for something like you wouldn't sometimes you would get half sentences or you would just they just wouldn't make sense. Because I remember like a couple of years ago, like seeing it, like you can just obviously tell that it was written by a robot. And then even with automated messages, they sound so real sometimes. And a couple of years ago, they didn't. So it's one of those things where we need time to actually sit with it and think about the rules that we need to institute and how to regulate it. But on the college level, I'd say it ultimately depends on the professor. There are some rules that what is it? University institutions as a whole can give professors to follow, but they're more so like a loose framework. And ultimately, it's up to the professors to fill in those gaps and to add in those regulations. Because my professor, when I was in my ethics class, we weren't allowed to use ChatGPT at all. Like that was just a given. It was not allowed at all. But her kids, my professor's kids, they were allowed to, I think her son was allowed to in one particular class, but I don't remember what it was. He was allowed to use it as a general framework to come up with points as an example for his essay or for his paper, but he wasn't allowed obviously to have it written verbatim. But yeah, it's one of those things where I personally don't I can't think of anything that any particular methods that we can utilize to regulate AI. I think it's one of those things where it's just we have to sit with it and see where it goes in order to actually be able to come up with those regulations and parameters.
Yeah, and Elizabeth, I mean, did you have any like thoughts you wanted to add on to that? Even in like middle school, like if you had any ideas of what teachers could start doing?
Eh, I have seen AI testers, but we never know, like Emily said, we never know how far AI can go because it's gotten so good over the past few years that it really sometimes it cannot be told if it was based off an AI. Um, I genuinely like it like slips my mind of what teachers could do that could immediately like put a stop to having to look at essays that have been completely written by AI. It's there's no telling how far it'll go.
Yeah, and I mean, I think my where I stand on the issue too, like back to what you said about how we have no clue where it can go, like that's a key point. Is I almost, like, wonder because, I mean and I wouldn't know, right? Because I wasn't alive back then, if this is anything like when they first made phones, when phones became, like, a big deal, right? People didn't know how are we gonna translate this into the school system, and eventually, as time went on, where we ended up finding solutions was we've now integrated technology into the school system, like, just 20 years ago, you wouldn't see computers in every classroom. Now we use computers for everything. And I guess that's why I feel like, to an extent, we may have hit a point where, like, as we have to adapt with constantly progressing technology, even because, back in the day, like when they were making phones and computers, you needed a like significant degree of education, but not nearly as much education as you need now to make a machine learning algorithm, like a data structure for artificial intelligence. So I think what that gets me thinking is there a world where we should try to just fully implement it into education as well. Like, make it an open tool, not just to write your entire essay, but almost because now we should and I guess this is where I think we can go back to even, like, art and stuff, Elizabeth. When it comes to, like, students who are learning data science, learning machine learning, this stuff is almost harmless. Like, go ahead, use it to help you create what you wanna create. But what if we get into art, painting, even stuff like dance, I'm sure there's, like, some, incorporation there, like, when it comes to the humanities, that's where it's like, we don't want AI to take over if it could. Um, yeah, that's just how I stand on it. Like, I feel like I don't know if you guys agree, but I think to an extent we should, like, allow it to be incorporated into education.
I
I
agree.
do. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just gonna say that I agree. I think it definitely could be a useful tool. I think it's just one of those things where we just need to allow it. We need to learn how to assimilate it into the classroom in a way that's more, what is it, beneficial than harmful. And then in terms of AI art, I wanted to ask Elizabeth, what medium of art do you do? Is it like graphic design? Because I know you're really passionate about AI and its relation to art and humanities.
Yes. So I do a mix of things, and where it really ties into AI is digital art. So basically, I use the medium Procreate for any digital art that I do. Traditional is more so just pen on paper, and you're making it with your own hands, and you cannot really just immediately take away any mistakes. You work with it really long, and you have to just adapt to what you're finding out that you can do without help from Procreate. Procreate is not fully AI. It is fairly AI at this point. It's you can open up a canvas, you can use a reference. That's where it draws into people tracing things and not using their own work to put into it. Um, but with AI, it almost looks and like Joshua said, it takes bits and pieces from people on the internet posting their art. Because if you draw something on Procreate really well, there are always going to be rumors that you either got it from AI or you traced it. And this is why people really like traditional art with just a sketchbook and a couple of pencils. And I like both. It's just with AI being a thing that we've just learned to use and adapt to now, that's the only part where it gets difficult and you're like, man, I really don't want to do digital art anymore. I'm just going to keep getting comments and feedback about how, oh, it's AI. But I think it's subjective. But also, tying back into putting it in certain areas of education and art. With education, there, like both of you said, there are areas where it would be more beneficial than harmful. And I think it's really harmful in art because it really just it takes the life out of doing something that you love with your own hands and just putting what you think is like one of your greatest passions into it. And like it just
No,
AI like life out of making those certain pieces.
I agree, especially because art, it's meant to be emotionally evocative. And when you have something like AI that's devoid of emotion creating it for you, it kind of takes the purpose and the meaning out of art. So I can see why a lot of artists have, contempt with that, or they just generally just don't like AI in relation to art. And I think even with other humanities, I mean, writing is also a form of art. I can see how in English classes why ChatGPT or AI just wouldn't necessarily be something that professors or artists of any sort find will want to use.
Well, it also begs like the point too. Like, do you guys think that it has to be do you guys think that AI is like truly incapable of making emotional art? Because obviously on paper, it can't. And this is definitely a different point than what Elizabeth was talking about with like people getting accused of making their art through AI. Because at that point, it's an integrity issue. Like, how come these people aren't getting credit for work that they've really worked on? But when we come back to the question of is it even a problem? I mean, is there you I mean, there's actually some AI art out there that people think does truly, like, convey emotion, and, of course, when you know the source, it feels a little bit devoid, it feels a little empty knowing, "Hey, it wasn't made by a real human being." There's not objectively any expression there, but while I don't wanna say we wanna normalize it, I'm almost wondering if it became normalized, people would just become used to AI as being the medium to create emotion, where they just write down what they want to see on their art piece and their prompts, what emotions they wanna convey, and it conveys them. And while that does lack soul for sure, I'm wondering if you guys think that would ever be a progressive state that's okay? Or do you guys think that that's, like, almost unacceptable, you know? Like, why would we ever wanna let AI become a main source of art?
I think there is a sort of middle ground right there, and I think I'm more towards that middle ground because whilst yes, it can convey emotion, I definitely think that it can because it is people putting these prompts of what they want to see into it. It's also, and I don't want to like sound rude about this. It's they're not making it with their own hands, but also it really it weighs in at both sides because of the fact that it is still someone behind a screen being like, okay, I want to put emotion into this. What will I show these people with this AI art? And with the progressive state issue, I think it'll likely become normalized. Specifically because AI has been here for a couple years and it's already been normalized with already just type in a prompt and it gives you an image or it gives you a story or whatever. And I think obviously since I agree with Emily saying that writing is also a form of art, I think it could also take over writing books too. But all forms of art, it could be accepted or it could not be accepted. There's always going to be varying opinions from every single person.
Yeah, I mean, I love the books analogy too. I didn't even think about that. Like, how could I mean, imagine reading an entire story, like, someone fell in love with a book series like it was Harry Potter. Except now the whole thing's written by an AI. Would it have the same oomph to it? I think what makes it now that like we've brought this up and I've like thought about it a bit more, what makes it more meaningful when it's written by a person is that person's writing it out of sharing the same emotions you share. That's why we resonate with characters in a story because they're representations of how we truly feel about things. And I completely understand that AI like detracts from it. I mean, it almost I do think and now I'm kind of, like, going on a broader spectrum, this isn't really relating to just arts anymore, but what do you guys think is the good stuff about AI? And more importantly, like, why do you think it even happened in the first place? Obviously, there's objective reasons, but, like, what even caused this to even occur? What was the need?
Emily, do you want to go first? Because I do have a couple of things, but I just want to know if you would want to share yours because I know I talk a lot.
Oh, don't worry, I do too. I think that AI definitely can be useful in a lot of ways. I think it's just that ultimately, I feel like it's one of those things where it's inherently neutral. It's not objectively good or bad, but I think it's just kind of human nature and human will that's made it what it is today. We kind of associate ChatGPT, I feel, with dishonesty, but I think it's just because it's kind of used in a way that's unregulated. But I think ideally, in a perfect world, it can be used as an assistant because that's what it's meant to do. It's supposed to help us. It's almost like Siri, where it's like if you need the answer to something, it's there to provide it for you. Except it's a little bit more advanced than that. And I think that ultimately, once we do start regulating it and we know how to actually assimilate it into the classroom and into the education system or in the workplace, it'll actually be a very fruitful tool for us because if somebody, for example, doesn't have a certain area of expertise, like let's say this is just very arbitrary, like creative writing, you could ask it for pointers on how to, what is it, write a poem or even like yeah, or any particular type of poem or things like that. You can ask it for general pointers. It can almost serve as the assistant it was meant to be. And I think ultimately, once we learn how to use it, then it's definitely going to be a lot more beneficial. And I think it does have its benefits. And I know that it can be very useful. It's just ultimately learning how to regulate it.
Yeah, I mean, Emily, could you oh, so I'm so sorry, Elizabeth. You can go ahead, you can go ahead.
I do really like the point that it's learning how to use it because even if it's been around for a few years, you're not really used to it until you com- figure out how you're supposed to use it and how it's supposed to help you. Just think back to when phones were made. People had to completely figure out how to get used to those and using them. Um, like there is one point that I want to tie back to using technology in the classroom. Like think back to like the 60s or the 70s, and it's like you wouldn't see that normally. And sometimes even like 5, 7, 15 or so like years ago, you wouldn't really see it in certain areas of classroom, like when there are like less fortunate schools who don't have the like fundings to get that into the school. I feel like that can dishearten students and think that their school is worse than others when it really isn't. What matters is the teachers in that aspect or the AI aspect. Went on a side tangent. But it's really just you have to learn how to use it because it's something that we are now going to have to adapt to considering it is still becoming a normalized thing.
That kind of brings on another thought for me. When you were talking about more like disadvantaged schools, how a thought or a question that I have more so is just how you guys think that the integration of ChatGPT could affect those in lower SES areas because ultimately we always see that those who are more well off or live in more funded counties, they tend to have better equipment or they tend to actually like integrate newer technology or more recent technology into their classrooms. So, I mean, as an example, like sometimes we'll see more wealthier school districts with MacBooks, right? With like really high end MacBooks. And then you'll see lower district schools. Sometimes they don't even have enough, what is it, Chromebooks to give to their students. Like sometimes, like you have to share a Chromebook with a student or another, or there's always issues there. So do you guys think that ChatGPT could, I mean, it's accessible on all technology platforms, but do you think that there might be a time in the future where it's only really available to those who can afford it because I'm assuming they might start charging for it eventually. I think there is like subscriptions for it, I think. I could be wrong about that. But do you guys think that there will ever be a point in the next few years where you will need to actually buy a subscription to ChatGPT and then those who are not as well off may only have like a beta form of it? Do you guys think that could be a possibility?
Yes, but I think that's there's always going to be a possibility that that could happen because it always happens in streaming services too. When it gets to where so many more people are using it, or charging more so that they can earn more money for their company and for who is watching stuff on their platform. And as someone who went to like a definitely less fortunate school in the middle of like Franklin County, there were a lot of kids that I was like friends with and I'm still friends with who go to much better middle schools now. And I'm so happy for them that they are able to go to those middle schools and be able to eventually go to um at least like middle class or even upper class sometimes schools where they're able to integrate certain technologies into it. But with my elementary school that I went to for I only went there for 1 year because I was originally in charter schools, and the board it didn't help, and money issues were going on, and that was the end of that. I went to the school, and I was friends with so many people that had to share Chromebooks, who had to just share a lot of things really. And we unfortunately this is a not really a tie into AI, but just showing that we had to share a lot was there were maybe like 3 or 4 people sharing a Chromebook at one time in multiple different classes. So we had to some of us had to take turns using Chromebooks. But I do think it is a possibility that ChatGPT could start putting like making you pay a subscription to be able to use it more. And realistically and more detailed, I think they'd probably give you something like certain games or certain chat apps where you can chat with AI that isn't it's like chatting with a character that someone made on AI. Um, I think it's gonna give you a few messages and then it's gonna pop up and say, "Hey, if you wanna talk more, you should buy a subscription." I think it's gonna be something like that.
I've seen that. I think Instagram has introduced that. I forget what it's called, but it's a feature where you can talk to certain AI characters, and certain celebrities are participating in it, where you can almost talk to, I guess, on not the celebrity themselves, but they make kind of a character based off of that celebrity's appearance, and then they have kind of a separate name. I'm trying to think. I know, like, I'm trying to think of anybody who does it. Like, I think one of the Kardashians does it, and but they don't go by their name. They have like some random like Jane Doe name, and you can talk to them and like almost treat them as a friend, which I feel like is kind of scary, especially for people who are celebrities, just because people tend to develop those I forget what it's called, a certain form of relationship where they feel like they're close to that person even though they're not. There's a term for it, but it's just not coming to me.
Parasocial
Yes,
relationships. For a
parasocial.
lot
Yeah, parasocial. They develop these parasocial relationships to them, and I think that can further perpetuate that once you kind of introduce this AI individual who has the exact same face as a celebrity, and I think that can be really scary and kind of fade into a really darker side of humanity. I'm sure at some point they'll make a Black Mirror episode about it, but what is it? Yeah, and I guess what I'm trying to ask out of it is how do you guys see AI going in terms of how it can be used recreationally?
Well, I mean, I think that what that reminds me of right off the bat is like, I don't know if you guys have been seeing this, but like people doing impersonations through AI, like deep fakes and like,
Oh, that's scary, but
yeah,
continue.
exactly. Like I know like this one person on YouTube who I watch who's really popular. I got an ad the other day with them in it. And I mean, it was, like, so believable, like, you could just barely tell it was fake, because obviously it was, like, ad they were advertising something they'd never advertised, but, like, the speech down to, like, the head movements, everything was perfect, they just had, like, certain pauses that were, like, a little bit irregular, right? But give it, like, 2 years, and I think people will be able to perfectly master being able to use stuff for things like deepfakes and all. And so, I mean, I actually wanted to bring back up the point about money. I thought this was just interesting because I have a very different perspective. I actually think platforms like ChatGPT and all will never become monetized. I think that we're entering a point where it's so normalized. It's like, why would if ChatGPT makes it cost money to use it, they'll have a million competitors people would just use instead because AI is becoming such a big deal. If you look at computer science, the top research field that everyone wants to learn is machine learning, which is machines learning, just learning straight up to do stuff that AI does. And when we talk about this stuff, though, about like parasocial relationships going into celebrities, going into stuff like that, that's where we get into big dangers of AI that I just don't think that right now we have created or accounted for like a way to protect ourselves from it. Because, 5 years ago, you'd see sci fi movies about this stuff, and people just didn't think that it would take only 5 years for it to come into reality. I think we need to start taking the government to the point where just like we have like legislative branches to focus on technological developments and cybercrime and cybersecurity. we need to start doing the same thing for artificial intelligence and almost see it as an evolution of computer science into the next like age of things. That's how I view it going forward in the future.
I agree that
I
definitely. Oh, no, go ahead, Elizabeth.
sorry, but I do agree with the point. And deepfakes, God, those do really scare me so much. I do not like them at all. Um, I do think it's going to get farther in the coming years, and that it's going to really like put a take a toll on people because of the fact that parasocial relationships even like they tie into each other. It's There was this one phenomenon, not phenomenon, but I'm thinking of something where it was like I remember seeing this. It had to do with a streamer, and he gave out this specific phone number where it would be a message saying like, "Oh, I hope you're doing good. I hope you'll have a good day today," and whatever about like to the person. But it wasn't his phone number, and people were developing such parasocial relationships with it that it is scary how far they went with it. It's more like it's more or less just what could what could it do to people when they form these parasocial relationships with what is just singularly AI.
I agree with that point, especially when we see people having these parasocial relationships to people that they tend to idealize. What is it? I think especially with the loneliness epidemic and how people, especially like our generations, like Gen Z, I don't you're Gen Z, right? Ellie, are you Gen Alpha, is it? Yeah. Which is it?
Gen Z.
Yeah, I feel like for Gen Z, I remember just like reading a lot more about how our recent generations are a lot more lonely. And I think it's largely just because we kind of are a little bit more isolated in the age of technology. It isn't really how it was a couple of decades ago, where people would go outside all the time and they had to socialize. I think I've noticed with boomers specifically, I know this is like really common that they're very like sociable. They make small talk, even in like waiting rooms, even where as with like millennials and like Gen Z, we're just like on our phones or we just kind of keep to ourselves. And I think that kind of perpetuates that loneliness. And I think with with the with having these AI bots that are impersonating almost these celebrities or these streamers or just generally people who are idolized in the media, I think that can be a little bit scary because they turn to these things like to speak to them and for emotional support or consolation because they may not have other people to turn to. And I think that can also be really scary and feed into like a darker side of their psyche. And I think it can turn to something that's really unhealthy.
No, I mean, absolutely, especially like I think it almost begs the question. Obviously, I think things like deepfakes and impersonations, they just have a basis to be outright illegal, right? But then things like building like robot, like, we're probably gonna hit the point where, you could build like a digital version of a celebrity you love that you can talk to like on a voice call and you can see them all like AI. And when we come into a point like that, I wonder if it begs a question about like, should that be considered illegal? Because, for example, like drugs are very addictive, so drugs are illegal. But there are other very addictive things that mess up the human psyche that we haven't made illegal yet. And I think it almost asks a question like, doing this with AI, what benefit does it bring to us as a society? I think that overall it only harms the health of society, even with things like social media, where there is a justification in which it does have like a good social cause in an extent of reconnecting with people, it's when it becomes too big of a deal that we have to ban it. But with AI, I'm wondering if it's like things like using AI to create fictional characters to talk to is almost something worth saying like, hey, there should be some rules against even doing this in the first place. Because what do you really get out of it other than not training social skills that, like, I quite frankly think are essential for human beings to be happy, to not feel lonely, to be thriving? I don't know if you guys would agree. I think making something illegal is a very strong term, especially when we should have the freedom to make the choices we feel are best for us. But what would you guys think on that?
I
So I
no,
keep doing it, but I do. There was an app that went extremely viral called Character AI, where people would make characters or celebrities or actors or whatever, and people I've seen people make videos about how the app has like shut down because there were too many servers. And I don't know if people were joking or not. I have very big trouble with telling that, but I don't know if they were joking or not about they weren't like actually like emailing the team and whatever saying like, "Hey, we need to pick this up. Like, come on." And people were like going actually like insane over the fact that this one app was down. And I do think that ties into the loneliness epidemic and social skills in younger generations. Because when you have stuff like this being so normalized and that so many people are doing it, you're like, "Oh, I should do it," because that's how trends come around. It doesn't help with younger people's, including like my age, it doesn't help with their social skills as they're growing into an adult. And it, for the most part, takes them into being kind of on their own and just not being able to talk to people.
Yeah, I mean, like, even to what you just talked about, Elizabeth, with everything about how, like, look how crazy these people went. It almost brings up a question too of, and we were talking about this way back. What are the benefits of AI? Because at the end of the day, what's starting to happen is everything with technology has been done with a goal of progression, but we already first saw it with like social media and all, where it's starting to like have progression, but at the same time, why aren't people happier if we're making all of this progress to make people happier? And I'm going on a little side talk here. There were even discussions like the average American working, like your average working salary job, back when most jobs were labor intensive, like, you actually go out there and you do the work, like working in a factory, working everything, were actually happier overall because they had no stresses outside of work about work. They could just come home from their job and they're done because their job is to perform an action. Now people have to start thinking a lot. Jobs have become a lot of thinking. Outside of my job, I have to think about what am I going to do for this, that, the company. And all these tools like AI technology are meant to progress us. But when you bring up a point like yours about, character AI and all that, it's starting to feel like we're like going backwards a little bit now. If we progress too much and we make life too easy for humans, something about us that's natural, like our biological inclination to, still like exercise, get work done, to fight, to thrive, starts to get hindered. And I think it brings up a very good point where I almost feel like we need to start limiting the idolization of AI in certain areas, in certain fields. Because initially AI was created to focus on data science, understanding like data sets to create new technology and marketing, like that's how we can have images now that can recognize a person versus a cat, whatever. It's all because of data science and AI. I think that pursuit is obviously still beneficial, but I feel like these other pursuits, like, using AI to make something like a fake character and things, that's where we need to start saying, hey, I actually wonder if there's a basis to make actions like this. We shouldn't allow it, or we shouldn't at least promote it as like something ethical to do.
No, I 100% agree, and I think, what is it? It's almost seen as something that's supposed to make us happier, but ultimately it kind of just fries your dopamine receptors. I know there's just so much psychology behind it. Even with social media, it's supposed to keep us reconnected, but just because of the way that the algorithm is formatted, it's a very specific type of like it's such a random interval, and because of that, it just gives you such a spike of dopamine because you don't get something every time you look. You take that chance every time you pick up your phone, and when you get something, you get hit with that dopamine. But because it's not like a regulated interval, it's it's like you pick up your phone not knowing whether or not you're going to get that dopamine hit or not, and that's what keeps you going back because you're like, oh, there's that chance I could get it again, and then it just ultimately just messes up your dopamine receptors over time. And I think that definitely contributes as to why our generations can not solely, but I think it definitely contributes as to why our generations suffer more with depression and anxiety just because we're getting messed up by being so consumed by social media and, like things like that. And I think that AI being used recreationally that way, what is it, by having these parasocial relationships could also further perpetuate like that those difficulties that we're having.
I do really like the point that just the overall point that you've made because when I was thinking about this earlier too, I was thinking about like while I was on the bus back from home, back from school, but I picked up my phone as I got on the bus to listen to music, and I got a notification that someone had like reposted my story because previously I went to a concert and I met the opening band. Very cool. And I had posted something about their drummer being very, very cool. And I picked it up. I just picked up my phone and he reposted it. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And that like dopamine. Now you bring up this point and what I was thinking about like earlier, even today. Um, because people on social media, most of the time, if it's just people that you haven't met in real life, or have only met like once because they're more like in the public eye, it makes me think about how you just you get dopamine from people you don't know. And this is really this really it goes for me because music is a big part of my personality and that's basically how I've grown in the past 3 years is through music. Because I picked up drumming, I picked up rock music, I picked up even like 60s pop music because I don't know. I mean it's good, but getting dopamine from people that you don't know is it's so weird to think about, but also it's the fact that a lot of people, like most people, do it all the time. You just pick up your phone and see, oh, this person reposted my story. Oh, so that's really cool. Or you see that an artist has released new music, or someone has posted a new video, and you get dopamine from it, and it scares me when I think about it more in depth. But when I do it personally, like throughout the day, I'm just like, oh, that's awesome. I love when they like making music and it like yeah getting dopamine from people that you don't know in depth it really it doesn't make sense to you but when you're doing it just in the moment you get a you get dopamine from it and you just think like oh that's awesome.
No, I agree. I think it's really normalized. It's something that we kind of don't stop to think twice about. I mean, I'm like a pretty pensive person, so sometimes I kind of sit back and I'm like, okay, wow. And I start thinking about how we as a society have like reached a certain point and how what is it, past events or the past decisions have contributed to where we are now. And I think sometimes it's like we need to take that step back and actually like think about how things can be unhealthy for us or healthy for us. I think it's just like I guess just generally promoting self-awareness. Like a couple I think this was last year. I deleted TikTok for a couple of months just because I know it's like really unhealthy for you and I'm a psychiatrist, so I kind of read up on stuff like that and how it can and how TikTok can ultimately mess up your attention span just because you're so used to seeing these very short videos. So your attention span just naturally shortens and kind of gets accustomed to what is it? Only wanting shorter videos or if you don't like something within the first couple of seconds just like scrolling past it or just immediately writing it off and getting distracted. So I deleted it for a couple of months, and it's crazy how much you feel like you have time after once you delete, social apps because one of my close friends, she did that actually over winter break, and she was like, "Oh my god, Emily, you're so right. I feel like I have so much time." Like, things almost feel so slow when you first delete social media and or just, like, TikTok or apps like that just because you're so used to being immersed in it that when you kind of take a step back and actually immerse yourself in the real tangible world it almost feels like you have just so much to do or there's so much that can be done you never really realize how social media impacts you and how much of a hold it has on you until you completely kind of disengage yourself from it.
And that's a big reason why I picked up reading uh like drawing and drumming and making music because I feel like it does really just it gives you not enough time or it makes you feel like you don't have enough time or it shortens your attention span. That's why every couple of months I just have to like detox my system about social media and everything. And so I put down my phone. This was even a couple of days ago. I put down my phone. I look over and I'm like, I should be practicing my drums right now because I took my like trial lesson and I decided that I was going to do it. And I was like, I have a drum pad. I have a practice pedal. Like, I should be doing this. I should be having fun with my time and not worrying about what is happening in the media. And so I just did that for like an hour and 30 minutes. And it felt like I had so much time. I could do this and then I could go to dance and then I could come home, shower, go to sleep, and just feel like I have the most time in the world for myself. And so that I don't have to focus on things that I shouldn't be taking on for myself because it doesn't really include me.
Yeah, no, I mean, in light like, we've talked about so much now that I have, like, thoughts on. I mean, first of all, I'm, like, super impressed with Elizabeth, to be honest, because like, I wish that's how I was thinking when I was 12 years old. Obviously, when I was 12, I wasn't worried about stuff like that, so I would just play, like, video games all the time and stuff. But now, like, habits like reading, meditating, stuff like that is super important to me because I think what's happened in our generation is we progressed like technologically. The capabilities of what we can do and the access to information we have is so much greater than, our parents and our grandparents. But the issue now is there's too much information. It's like we went from one extreme to the other. And what happens is even though our parents and grandparents didn't have access to like, because right now you could be a like 13-year-old teenager, and you'll see 13-year-old teenagers who through e-commerce, digital like advertising, digital video creation, or even just like programming, create these incredible applications that, 20 years ago, it would take a team of 20 adults to like be able to accomplish the stuff one kid can now. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, because of the same technology that allows us to progress so much, we've also ended up in a position where technology is allowing us to like degenerate so much as well because of things like scrolling, killing our attention span. And it's like the people that I think come out as the most successful now in our generation are the people that figure out how to conquer the negatives of technology, how to break out of addiction, how to break out of all that, and then return but still take advantage of all of the, like, advantages and benefits of technology. And I think I'm just, like, taking everything back now, all the way back to AI. I think one of the biggest things we have to fear is people don't realize when they're, like, stuck scrolling and stuff, the reason that they can get hooked is because of AI algorithms and machine learning algorithms that know what they wanna watch, that know what they're interested in to keep them hooked on scrolling over and over again. And so, I think that AI, while that was just like scrolling, now that we're getting into more and more issues with parasocial relationships, everything should be viewed as almost like the next level of like potential for both progression and degeneracy within how like it gets utilized. And we need to learn how to recognize how to abuse and take advantage of like what it's capable of. And also at the same time avoid everything it's capable of in regards to like degenerating us, making our attention span worse. So yeah, I mean, I'm even scared about like VR stuff. People are gonna start maybe even living in like imaginary worlds because they just don't want to like face reality. And
Even
I mean, we only have like a few minutes left on the show, so I'd just love to hear like you guys can say your final thoughts, your concluding thoughts. Like, what are like key lessons you either have learned, want to like tell others, stuff like that.
I think the metaverse is definitely like a whole other anecdote that we can definitely get into another time because there's just so much to it. I mean, I've even seen that there are VR concerts now, which is crazy. That and they like you just have to put on your Oculus and then just join up. And I think that's so it's so odd, and you can even make your own avatar, but I don't wanna get too much into that just because we're on a time crunch, but I think ultimately what you were saying about what is it, being able to utilize these systems as a tool, but while also being able to disengage, I think ultimately it comes down to discipline, and I guess in that regard, some things just never change because discipline is always an important characteristic for people to have and to learn, just because discipline will have you achieve your goals ultimately when you apply yourself and learn how to actually do things in moderation. But yeah, Elizabeth, do you have any final thoughts?
My final thoughts, like overall, I think there's always going to be varying opinions on AI. There's always going to be varying opinions on AI art. It's really just everything is subject. Most things are subjective, but morally, sometimes it is objective. But everybody has their different opinions, and we shared ours today. And I love y'all's points, and I love that we got to do this. So
Yeah, and then I mean, we still got some time left to talk, but obviously maybe not start up like a whole new conversation or anything, but I definitely think that where I stand is that like main point I still had that I think that this is just us entering the next stage of technology. If when we watch like Back to the Future and all those kinds of movies, people had lots of predictions of where does technology go. And like right now, flying cars isn't something we're pursuing. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, AI is now where things have ended up taking a turn for. And I think that the biggest, like most crucial thing that we as both teenagers, as young adults, and even people that are adults can do going into this next stage of technology is be very cautious, be very wary of where is it being used for benefit and where is it being used for harm. Because like any progressive like thing in life, there's always going to be both sides of the spectrum. When like phones first came out, you know, on one hand, it strains your eyes, like the radiation from the screen is bad for you. On the other hand, it provides you with access to so much more information, everything of that sort. And I think that what we just need to do now is be very careful entering like this new stage of technology. Obviously, I'd love it if we could like find ways to start pre like proactively implementing laws in preparation for what AI could do in the future. But at the same time, I don't know like any like solutions, like real solutions I could propose on that. So it's not my place to necessarily fully ask for. But I think that's just a great point for people to like think about and discuss. So with that being said, I mean, that's everything from me. Thank you so much to everybody that listened to the episode today. I really appreciate it. And yeah, again, Elizabeth and Emily, we still have a minute or two if you guys want to say bye, any last things, but that's it from me. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you guys for watching or for tuning in, and thank you, Elizabeth, for being our guest today.
All right, thank you for letting me on the show. And I appreciate everyone that watches this.
All right. Then, with that being said, thank you, like last time, for watching through their eyes. We don't know for sure what our next plans are going into the next episode, but we'll try to bring on another guest, Emily, or not Emily, sorry, Elizabeth. If you want to come back, you're completely free to. And yeah, you guys will see what the topic is then. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you guys later.
And stay on.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com and DeltaForce.net.